When I first got the job, I look at the title, Correction Department. So correction means what to you? My name is Michael Rivera. I was born in Puerto Rico. I came here when I was about 10 and a half. And my last job was with the Correction Department. And I was a correction officer for about 27 years. And I got promoted once to captain. And I retired from there around 2000.
So what was it like for you in the early days making the transition from Puerto Rico to America?
Because I was very young at the time, it didn't take me long to pick up the language. My sister picked it up faster than me, but the Spanish people have a tendency to talk real fast, so my sister learned the language, but she was talking like a mile a minute and the teachers would tell her to slow down. I picked it up and I was able to read paragraphs in English, so the teacher moved me out of that classroom. I told her not to. Why? Because I could read, but I didn't understand what I was reading.
Oh, so were you in an ESL class or ELL class?
No, I was in a regular class, but the teacher thought I didn't belong in that class because I was catching up too fast, you know what I mean? So I tried to tell her, but she didn't listen, that I could read a paragraph, but I didn't know what I was reading because I could read English, right? So then I would translate into Spanish in my head and back to English, and I found it very hard. So when she moved me, I started going downhill, you know, because then the other class was too advanced for me, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I always find it interesting, like when somebody speaks multiple languages, how do you, like, in terms of like when you're transitioning, like you're reading something in English, in terms of how the brain processes that information, how does that work? Is there like you have to take a little bit more time for the comprehension to translate?
Well, what I did was, whatever English I listened to, and if they wanted an answer, I would go in my head in Spanish, and then I come back in English, you know what I mean?
Oh.
Now I don't do that anymore, you know what I mean? Because you've only learned the language and all that, but that's what most people do.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So at what point you decided that you wanted to become a correctional officer?
Well, I went into the armed forces, and I left there around 1967 in June. And I was going to take a couple of weeks off before I went to get a job. And a couple of weeks turned to be a couple of years. And then when you go look for a job, people, you got to be bonded. And what have you done for the past 2 years? So I went to work for the post office. Then I went to work for another city agency for schools. And then I went to the correction department. So, I didn't have too many choices. So stay in school and learn. So you go through the same problems I went through.
Right. Yeah, so when you say armed forces, you're referring to the military, right?
Yeah, and the army.
Okay, the army. Okay, how was that like? What was that like?
At first I didn't care for it, but then you get gone home like anything else, you know what I mean? And I was there for 2 years, and I became, I took a school in Kisla Air Force Base, even though I was in the army, for air traffic control. And then I found out that the life expectancy of air traffic control in Vietnam was like seconds after you post on high grounds. So I stopped studying and they threw me out. Then I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama to become an instructor in flight simulation. So that's where I did my time in flight simulation.
Good.
Yeah, and then I retired. I left there around 67, and that's about it, you know what I mean?
Right, so talk to us a little bit about your time in working as a correctional officer, like some of your experiences and so things of that nature.
Well, as a correction officer, when I first got the job, I look at the title, Correction Department. So correction means what to you? Correction means that you correct something, right?
Right.
So I thought I was going to be helping people, but it's just the opposite. It's like a warehouse, full of individuals that keep coming back. So it was very rough to transition, and there's a lot of gangs in there too. The Bloods, the Crips, the Spanish people and whatnot, and it's like a jungle in the correction department.
So how do you manage yourself in that environment? You're actually overseeing like thousands or hundreds of different inmates from different backgrounds. How do you navigate yourself as a correction officer dealing with them?
Well, I always thought about when I took the job that I wanted to help people. So if I saw a new inmate coming in that looked a little meek and mild, I would give him advice not to take any cigarettes from anybody else, or be careful who you hang around with, because they'll switch cells and then they'll go into your cell and do stuff to you. You know what I mean? So that's correction. Correction is it's like a jungle in there.
Right. I remember you shared with me a story. You shared with me a story recently about when you were speaking to somebody and he was like speaking loud.
Okay, once I got promoted, I went to this particular jail, and a lot of inmates need help. So they approached me. One guy approached me, but he was yelling in a loud voice. I told him, I said, if you want me to listen to you, you will speak with the same tone of voice that I have. Otherwise, I'm going to walk away. And what I usually do to calm the inmates down, which nobody does, I used to call him sir. Yes, sir, can I help you? And that will shock them, you know what I mean? Because most captains and most officers, they treat the inmates like trash, you know what I mean? And their mothers and fathers would treat them like that also. So they used to that response, you know, like I used to say when I was ready to go to meal, right? The officer says, get him lined up behind the yellow lines, they're going to go out to meal. And I would say, okay, gentlemen, let's go behind the yellow line, line it up. Gentlemen, let's go behind the yellow line, line it up. And nobody pays attention until I started using vulgarity. Then they turn around and they line up. So I finally had to go see the psychiatrist to tell him what was happening. And the story that he told me is this, that's how they were raised, you know what I mean? First, when they don't get up for school, the mother yells and screams, then they get up. After that, she yells and screams, they don't get up, so she throws water on them. And then after that, she curses at them and whatnot. And then they get up, you know what I mean? And that's what they miss taught.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did that change your outlook? Did it affect you? I know you said you had to go and see a psychologist, but in terms of like, how did it affect you moving forward? Did it change your perspective in dealing with those inmates in terms of using, as we would say, respectable terms versus vulgarity?
Well, at first, when I went to the psychiatrist, it wasn't for me. It was to tell the psychiatrist what I incur in the jail system, you know. And that's when he told me how the kids were raised, some of them, you know, I mean, not all of them, how they were raised. So the first year I was there, you have to work a year before you go on vacation. But I was getting married, so I asked for my vacation within 6 months. That meant that I had to come back and do another year when I came back off vacation, right? And I said, my God, what do I have to do this another 20 years? I felt like quitting, you know what I mean? Because it's like working in the jungle, you know what I mean? So I use rough words when it was needed. Other than that, I just speak to them like human beings, you know what I mean? And some of them appreciated it, you know what I mean? But a lot of inmates take kindness for weakness. So if you cater to a couple of guys, then they take advantage, and so you have to draw a line. You know what I mean? You have to be respected, but be fair. So if the guy needed to go to the dentist or the eye doctor or whatever, I make sure that they went. You know what I mean? Because the officer used to come to each housing area and says, "I'm only taking 10." So now, if I was the officer in charge of the housing area, I would look around and see who's actually hurting. The guy's got a toothache or he's got a swollen mouth and whatnot. I make sure that he was in the front of the line. Otherwise, the inmates that I used to going out, they don't need no medication. They just want to get out of the housing area, right? So I make sure that whoever needed help would get help, you know what I mean?
Right. When you started moving up the ranks, right, and you transitioned to becoming a captain, did that change your perspective on how you, in terms of how you handle yourself or you deal with the inmates, you're either correctional officer, did that change or you remain pretty much the same?
It changes automatically because first of all, they don't let you work in the same housing area or same jail that you worked before because you're too familiar with the other officers. You might show partiality, you know what I mean? So they put you in another jail, and incidents happen, stabbings and slashings, fights, and then you have to write reports. But again, I carry myself, I respected the officers, I found out what they needed, the need was, and I tried to help them. And I also called the inmates by the surname, you know what I mean? If I was working in the women's jail, I said, ma'am, can I help you? You know, and the man, yes sir. And that would make him step back and say, whoa, nobody ever treated him like this before, you know what I mean? With respect.
I know earlier you mentioned that you did some time in the Army.
Yes.
Right? Which one did you prefer or enjoy the most, working as a military officer or a correctional officer?
Well, the Army, after I got used to it, it was fun, you know. But correction, like I said before, I thought I was going to be helping people, and it's just the opposite. You know what I mean? Some of the youngsters that are there have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cases pending. They go out, and sometimes they come back the same day. Sometimes they come back within a week. You know what I mean? So it's like warehousing. You know what I mean? In the winter time, when I first got the job, a lot of derelicts will come to jail to spend the winter behind, you know, where they get 3 meals a day. You know what I mean? And dentists and whatever. Later on, when the drugs hit the United States, a lot of people will come into jail for drug-related cases and for shootings and stabbings, because what happens is this: when you start dealing drugs, you have a neighborhood, and somebody tries to deal drugs in that neighborhood, then you have a conflict, you know what I mean? So a lot of people will come to jail for attempted murder, whatever, you know what I mean? So it's a vicious, like I said, working in the jail system is not for everybody. If it wasn't because I was going to get married and I needed a job, I probably would have quit, you know what I mean? I got called for the police department 7 different times, but by that time I had about 6 months in corrections, and I hate the cold weather, so I didn't want to work outside, so I made a choice to stay in corrections, you know what I mean?
Right, okay, that makes sense. As you reflect on your time serving in the as a correctional officer, what advice would you offer to any individuals who aspire to become a correctional officer?
I had spoken to a couple of people that became correctional officer when I spoke to them from my neighborhood, and the advice I gave them is to treat everybody like a human being, you know what I mean? Get some respect. The only way you're going to get respect is by giving respect and doing the best you can. And don't forget that they're human beings, so if they need toilet tissue or whatever it is, make sure you give it to them. If they need to go to the clinic, make sure they go. When I worked the mess hall duty sometimes, the last house that came in was the house that got arrested, and they would come into the kitchen, and I would give them more extra food, you know, even though I wasn't supposed to, because the food is going to be thrown away anyway, right? And the captain that was in charge in the mess hall, he never wanted that done. So one day I was doing it, and he saw me, but he didn't say anything. Why? Because it was the last house. The guy just came off the street. They're hungry and whatnot. And the way I look at things is this: why throw away something when you could let somebody have it? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And lastly, was there? I know you have a correctional officer, you have the police department. Was there some sort of like relationship between the two, and how was that relationship?
Well, the only relationship between the two is that the police officer in the streets makes the arrest. The individual person goes to court. If he gets found guilty, he goes to jail. If his case that's pending, then he winds up in Rikers Island awaiting trial. So the cop outside in the street arrests him, we get him in the jail. Anybody that got sentenced to more than a year will go automatically upstate. So less than a year, they stayed in Rikers Island.
Okay. I know I said the last question, but this is the last one. Right? In terms of rehabilitation, during your time, was there, what was the rehabilitation program like in the prison system during your time?
Well, they had they had STEP, and STEP was a separate unit where they teach the inmates discipline, maybe some little bit of schooling, and then before I left, they had training for cooking school. You know what I mean? And they had different trades, but basically cooking. And so this way, when the inmate gets out to the street, if he has a job, most likely he won't come back. The inmates that just leave will come back very, very seldom, you know what I mean, that have jobs. But the inmates that don't have training, all they know is how to get money one way or the other, you know what I mean?
Have you ever met somebody who was...
Yes, I have. I used to belong to a drug rehab program. I was the chairman on there, and at the end of the maybe 6 months later, when the people graduated, they would have a gathering in one of the caterers. And one time I was sitting at this table, and this female was looking at me, and she kept looking at me, and I said, "Is there a problem?" She says, "Don't you recognize me, Captain Rivera? I was an inmate in the jail, you know, and you gave me good advice." And the same thing happened with the male inmates. I gave them advice, and some of them would take it, and some of them don't come back, you know what I mean? So I have met people that were in jail, and I met them in the streets, and they had a job already, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. Good. All right, thank you, Mr. Rivera.